In 1991, on his third attempt to try and climb Mount Everest, American mountain guide Eric Simonson finally stood on the summit of the world. Back then, climbers carried their own oxygen, fixed their own ropes. Everest was a very different place. But something happened to Eric Simonson on that climb that would haunt him for years. On his way up to the northeast ridge, he spotted something out of place. It was just below what's known as the first step. He spotted something. It was buried in the snow, stashed underneath a large boulder. It was a small metal cylinder, old, faded, definitely out of place. He didn't have the time or energy to investigate and left it where it was. But the image of that old bottle was burned into his memory. And the question followed him down the mountain. What was that? Who dropped it there? And could it be connected to Mallory and Irvine? Eric Simonson went on to become one of the most respected and successful expedition leaders in the world. Decades in the Himalayas, over 100 expeditions, a reputation for logistics, precision, and judgment. But despite everything he accomplished, he could never forget that bottle. So when he partnered with the young German historian Jochen Hemmleb, and the two began planning for a dedicated search for the remains of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, who perished on the mountain back in 1924, Eric finally had the chance to go back to the exact spot he'd never been able to shake from his mind. That was on the 1999 Mallory and Irvine research expedition. I was the high-altitude cameraman on that expedition that discovered the remains of George Mallory. And on a cold morning just under the northeast ridge, which leads up to the hallowed summit of Mount Everest, two of my teammates, Tap Richards and Jake Norton, climbed straight toward that location that Eric Simonson had described in minute detail from his memory 8 years earlier. What happened next is something that changed the history of the mountain forever. They found the oxygen bottle. Exactly where Eric Simonson said it would be. It was a 1924 oxygen bottle. The paint was faded, metal, scarred by time, but the number was still visible, number 9. And this wasn't just any artifact. This is the highest physical clue ever discovered from Mallory and Irvine. It's amazing that anything could be found after 75 years on the mountain, but Everest has a way of holding on to its secrets, and that 1924 oxygen bottle sat at roughly 8,400 meters, far above where George Mallory's remains were found in 1999 by Conrad Anker on that expedition. And it was not far from the location of the ice axe that was found by Percy Wyn-Harris in 1933, for many years believed to have been the possession of Sandy Irvine. I did a video on this just recently, interviewing historian Bob Edwards and some theories on the ice axe and the oxygen bottle. You're really going to need to see that video to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. The location of that oxygen bottle tells us something distinctly. Not everything, but it tells us that Mallory and Irvine climbed at least that high. But as my guest in today's video, Everest historian Jochen Hemmleb, who organized and mapped out the entire search area during the 1999 and 2001 search expeditions, he believes the location of the bottle can tell us a lot of things, but what it cannot tell us is which route Mallory and Irvine intended to take on that fateful day in June of 1924. The oxygen bottles that Mallory and Irvine were intending to use on that day were written on the back of an envelope by Mallory himself, handwritten. It's his inventory for Summit Day. And you can see number 9 is right there on that list. And now, to understand what oxygen bottle number 9 means, I turned to Jochen Hemmleb to tell me himself what the significance of it is and what we might learn from the location of it. As it would turn out, after my recent video and interview with Bob Edwards about his shocking theories about the location of the ice axe found in 1933 and oxygen bottle number 9, Jochen immediately agreed to do a short interview with me so he can share his theories on the exact location, particularly of oxygen bottle number 9, but I think that you'll be interested to hear how different it is from other theories and that of Bob Edwards. So now let's return back to oxygen bottle number 9. The exact location of where Jake and Tap, or I believe Tap was the one who originally spotted it, they did not take a GPS reading at the location that they spotted it. But what I've heard is that there have been there's like a peanut gallery of people who feel that there's some conspiracy at hand about where the bottle was found. And so kind of what can you say about the exact location of it?
I've talked to Tab and I've talked to Jake, both back in the early 2000s and in recent years about that discovery. One thing's for sure, the bottle in question, the one that Tab handed to me at ABC saying I've got an interesting souvenir, and all of a sudden I realized this is 1924, because from his description from up there, from when he recovered the bottle on the Northeast Ridge, he called on the radio and he gave a description and said it's like the Chinese 1975 bottle, but gray or unpainted. So I thought it was a 1960 bottle. And then he came down to ABC 2 days later and he said, I got an interesting souvenir, pulled out that bottle, and I immediately recognized it at a 1924 bottle, and that was amazing. That was an amazing feeling. My God, you found a 1924 bottle. That was really great, because more than anything, it showed that, yeah, Mallory and Irvine were really up there, high on the ridge. So Tab found the bottle and found the bottle wedged under a boulder, and that boulder was some distance away from the first step. That is beyond any doubt. That is for sure. He said this was in fog conditions, weather was deteriorating, and it was in a boulder field that had a couple of dozens of similar boulders. So it's quite hard to pinpoint in retrospect where exactly that bottle was located. So that's when some confusion started. And I have to blame myself for some of this confusion, because I put Dave Hahn on record saying that Dave Hahn seemed to remember that a Sherpa found an old oxygen bottle on the way up and stashed it higher up the ridge. But that account was never confirmed by anyone. So this might have been just a false impression. And I don't want to say anything negative about Dave in that regard. It's just was a recollection, and I found that a recollection, it was important to put it down on record, because whenever there is uncertainty, it should be named as such. But in order to resolve this sort of uncertainty, I talked to Tab and Jake and Eric again, and Eric pointed out where he had found the oxygen bottle. Again, he said there's also some uncertainty, but here's a picture of the first step. Here's that boulder. I seem to remember this. I'm not entirely sure, but I seem to remember this. He marked it, and it is in exactly the same area Tab and Jake described. So we can not pinpoint the exact spot. This is it. But we can say it's at a prominent boulder in a general area that is not that large. So we have a good approximation of the area where it was found, of the location as it was found. And I would say we can say so with a certainty of perhaps plus minus 30 or 20 meters in horizontal distance. And that's it. And that gives us about also a certain variation in altitude. So we can say it was found between 8,460 and 8,480. And that's as far as we can go if you want accuracy. But
Perfect.
As far as any conspiracy is concerned, that's pure bullshit, in my opinion.
As a person extremely familiar with the vagaries and different routes taken to the summit, whether via the ridge or the now called Norton Couloir, would the location of that oxygen bottle, is because that's the highest piece of evidence ever found, can you make any determination from the location of that bottle of which way they were going on the mountain, or is that still a complete coin toss?
The interesting thing is that the oxygen bottle is pretty much in the location where you have to make that decision. Whether you go right along Norton's Traverse or call it the wyn-harris Traverse, that's also a bit of a misunderstanding. People make it appear as if there was a huge difference between the wyn-harris Traverse done in 1933 and the Norton Traverse done in 1924. The distance between the two is probably not more than 50, 60 feet. And I know this because I saw a sketch drawn by Lawrence Wager in 1933. And he made that point very clearly. Wager and wyn-harris, they followed a ramp that is a bit lower than nowadays approach to the first step. So Eric Simonson was following this higher approach in 91, and as he told me, it was a case of, the terrain was snowed up. He was emerging from the ridge. He was starting to traverse a bit away from the ridge crest towards the first step, and he saw this prominent boulder, so he headed towards it. And the interesting thing is, it might have been very similar conditions in 1924. Bits of snowed up terrain, so you probably would make for that boulder because it's a bit of a landmark. Not overly prominent, but prominent still. And that boulder is located a bit lower down from today's traverse line to the first step, and a bit above the ramp, the exit from the ramp Wager and wyn-harris used in 1933. So the bottle is located at very precisely the area where you would make the decision, will I go slightly left and up the first step, or will I continue traversing down? And I wonder if this is of some significance, that the bottle was stashed at exactly this point. And who knows? I'm not. I have not a firm opinion on that. But it is in a very interesting area in terms of general topography on Everest's northeast ridge.
So it's key to see here that Jochen does not believe that oxygen bottle 9 was accidentally dropped. It wasn't staged, it wasn't placed as a marker, and it wasn't part of a breadcrumb trail that Mallory and Irvine, were leaving to mark a way up or down the mountain. It was dropped there, but intentionally in the middle of the hardest climbing day of their lives. And as Jochen said, it was on their way up the mountain. Just which direction they went from there, we don't know. My personal gut instinct, and I'll let Jochen elaborate more, is that the bottle was left behind on their way up the mountain because it was stashed under a boulder, and it stayed there for 75 years until Eric Simonson chanced across it in 1991. And that's what makes it so haunting. It tells us at least how high they climbed. And if we're right about them still going up, they were certainly clear enough in their thinking, strong enough, warm enough, and in a place that they could carefully stash that bottle under a rock, possibly to collect it on their way back down. But it stops just short of telling us, as Jochen will describe, which way they went from there. Some generic math would show us that bottle number 9 could mark perfectly the distance that Mallory and Irvine might have covered from their high camp to that exact location if the Mallory's notes are to be believed. At a full flow, 2.2 liters per minute in that oxygen bottle should have lasted them about 3 hours and 40 minutes, which means that if they left Camp 6, their high camp, at around sunrise, the bottle probably would have run out somewhere in the location where Jake Norton and Tap Richards found it in 1999 under the direction of Eric Simonson. But of course, there's really no way to tell what time they left camp. It's virtually impossible. Mallory even made a mistake in his note saying that he should be seen up on the ridge at 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. But we do know that if the theory about them going up when stashing that oxygen bottle is true, they were climbing strongly, their progress matched modern climbing rates, or relatively so. They were moving with purpose and not struggling, and they were well above 8,400 meters relatively early in the morning. And at that point, they were poised to make a decisive choice on which route they were going to go climb toward the summit. And now we should hearken ever so briefly back to Noel Odell's sighting. I want to share with you these photographs that Jochen Hemmleb took with a telephoto lens in 2001. You can see the view, generally speaking, of where Noel Odell was standing when he spotted them on June 8th, 1924 at 12:50 in the afternoon. Here's the first step, and you can see a climber in the patch of snow, absolutely tiny. You can understand how it would be almost impossible to know if they were moving at all. Here's the second step, and then here's the third step. Look at how tiny these figures actually look on the mountain. It's no wonder that some other climbers in that expedition had thought, is it possible that he didn't see climbers at all and that they were just rocks? And if you stare at things long enough, it looks like they could be moving. And it's true, your eyes don't necessarily play tricks with you, but when you're looking at a distance away of two tiny objects, sometimes your head moves a little bit and you're thinking, are they moving forward, backward, or not at all? But taking Noel Odell's sighting from his written word, it's apparent that Mallory and Irvine were seen more likely on the first step or on the third step. But back in the day, that last step but one, the third step wasn't recognized back then. It was only the first and second steps, and the third step was just thought to be part of the pyramid. So if you're going to say the last step but one, wouldn't the but one be the second step? But that's all theory. In this, we're focusing on oxygen bottle number 9. So back to the point, if we could, let's get back on subject. But before we do, I really want to share with you about Everest Mystery merchandise. I hope you'll take a moment to check it out. Great for gifts, or great for gifts for yourself as well during the holiday season. Check this out. I've got hoodies and hiking hoodies and some really cool hats, and I'm going to be adding some t-shirts soon. So I'm going to put a link to the Everest Mystery merch site in the description of this video. Definitely check it out. There might be something for you if you're a fan of the ultimate Everest mystery, the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. And also for those who want a broader picture of the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. We're taking a detailed view of just one of the objects, you're going to have to check out my video, The Ultimate Everest Mystery Guide, Mallory and Irvine's Final Steps. The link to that video will be in the description below. It's a must-see for anybody interested in the mystery of Mallory and Irvine, so be sure to check that link out in the description below. So, for all that bottle number 9 reveals, it refuses to answer one primary question. Which route did they take to the summit? Did Mallory and Irvine go toward the ridge to climb up and over the second step? Or did they go underneath the ridge, following, generally speaking, Norton and Somervell's route, which would have taken them up the couloir, which is now called the Norton Couloir? Now, Bob Edwards, as featured in my previous video, which will be linked in the description, has theorized that the ice axe and oxygen bottle were intentionally placed in the locations where they were found the day before the summit attempt on June 7th, 1924. Respectfully, Jochen disagrees. He points out something very simple but crucial. But I want to know if you have any insight, not necessarily all on the ice axe, but certainly on oxygen bottle number 9, and maybe shed some more light on it and what your thoughts are on it.
For me, I think the two are unrelated, except for the fact that, no, no fact at all. I think the ice axe most likely marked the place of an accident. Although it was lying free, according to wyn-harris and Wager, it was lying free on a slab. It is in a location that is absolutely not what you would expect if it was left there as a marker of some kind. I mean, I've done on climbs, I've done markings like erecting a cairn or stashing gear, and you tend to do it in conspicuous places, in prominent places, like at the base of a rock step or something like that. That's the obvious place to stash some gear or place a cairn, a marker or something like that. And the ice axe site, from the description of it, doesn't look that conspicuous at all, because it was on that slope, on that series of slabs. And if it was placed there in some ways as a marker, you would have expected it either up on the ridge crest or at the base of the first step or whatever. On the other hand, the place where bottle number 9 was found, that really looked like a place where you would stash gear or, cache an empty oxygen bottle. Like if you don't want to drop it, you just stash it under a boulder or something like that. Maybe has a double function as a marker on the way down. It's always interesting that the place Eric marked on the photograph is really a fairly prominent boulder, and it's now somewhere between where nowadays the route goes to the first step and where the ramp taken by Wager and wyn-harris comes up. So it's somewhere in between, and that explains why the bottle was not seen for such a long time. So I think the two are unrelated, and the bottle was, in my opinion, most likely dropped on the ascent when it was empty, and the ice axe was lost on the descent due to an accident. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Jochen, so in terms of that, have there been any research done or any tests done on oxygen bottle number 9? And I'll say first that we were all there when Jake turned the knob and we heard the hissing noise. That
did not happen at base camp. I recall it happened during the press conference in Kathmandu. I remember the surprise by the audience, and I also remember one voice, and it was probably Conrad. I'm not sure, but someone said equalizing pressure, and that was the immediate impression we all had. I mean, of course, we initially thought, oh, this is oxygen, but it was equalizing pressure. And the hissing stopped after a few seconds. And I don't think, man, it's 26 years ago, but I don't think that it was because the valve was turned off again, but it was simply because it was equalized. As far as I remember, we didn't turn the valve at ABC or at base camp. The only time when the bottle was really out there for people to look at it was at ABC. To my knowledge, no testing has ever been done on the bottle. But I feel reasonably sure that the bottle was empty and that what we heard at the press conference was equalizing pressure.
Mm. Yeah, like when you fly in an airplane and you check your bags and you open the bag up and your shampoo bottle is exploded or something like that. And that's what Ziploc baggies are for.
Or when you try to open a can of easy cheese at ABC.
So since I went and saw the artifacts related to Noel Odell a year ago, oxygen bottle number 11, and had sent to you the list that Noel Odell kept of all the oxygen bottles from the 1924 expedition, which I think lit you up like a Christmas tree because it's pretty cool to see that. What are the missing pieces in relation to the oxygen bottles? Like, what if we could locate, what would we need to locate, if you will, in order to kind of put some more pieces of the puzzle together regarding that fateful day on June 8th in 24?
I mean, Mallory had the letter envelope on which he noted 5 bottles of oxygen with filling pressure. All those bottles are on Odell's list at base camp, of course. And bottle number 9 ties that list to the summit climb. So it's not a big step to assume that those were the 5 bottles they took with them. And what I keep wondering is where did the other 4 bottles end up? That's something I would like to know.
In the end, oxygen bottle number 9 does not solve the mystery, but it does sharpen it greatly. It narrows the window. It more or less confirms a partial timeline. It elevates the progress of Mallory and Irvine, and to this day remains the highest physical piece of evidence left behind by Mallory and Irvine on that fateful, tragic day, June 8th, 1924. What do you think? Leave your comment in the section below. We'd love to hear what your theories are and if you have any other ideas. And what are some other subjects or topics you'd like me to do a deeper dive on? Be sure to leave those in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to the channel and check out our members section by clicking the join button. There is a ton of exclusive content in there that you're going to enjoy. And also, if you're interested in a free members section, check out my Patreon page, which also has exclusive content in patreon.com/Everest Mystery. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Remember, do a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you.